And we are live. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope everybody's doing good. I'm sorry I'm a little disheveled right now. I took a nap right before we did this, so I'm kind of waking up a little bit, but all is good. All is good. I am going to be joined today by Zaganel and our friend Von Clown. So here is Von Clown. Von Clown, I hope you're doing good.
I am well. I also took a nap.
Yeah, it was a nap sort of day, dude. Nap, sometimes a nap is literally the best thing. When you can't keep your eyes open and they're getting heavy, and then you take that nap and you wake up and you don't feel like 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound sack, it's golden. But sometimes naps make you feel awful. So outside of naps, we have a lot going on in Ukraine, so I'm going to take us over to the good old map, and we can go over some updates. Again, down here in the Robotny section, it looks like the Russians have held in Robotny, unlike last time where when they made this advance, they ended up getting pushed out. So that's important. And then there's also reported movement somewhere here northwest of Verbove. I have not mapped that yet, just because I do not have the exact geolocation to know where to put the edge of the corner, but it's basically just a little square right here. So more pressure getting put on the outside of the salient. Not too many changes here. The fighting is still not very intense, more positional. A lot of artillery and FPVs is mostly what's going on in Robotny section. Down here in Kerson, we have a reported, we've got a video of Russian units operating in this delta sort of section of the Dnieper River. It doesn't necessarily mean that the area is fully under Russian control, but the Russians are operating around this lake. So we mostly put this under Ukrainian control just because this bank of the this side of the Dnieper has a slight elevation advantage over this side. So the Ukrainians have line of sight on most of this bank. So the Russians being in here is very difficult. But with the weakening Ukrainian artillery, especially in this region, I imagine the Russians are going to start operating a lot more in this section. And remember that the river is different, right? The river doesn't look like it normally does anymore. Sorry, moving some stuff around. It doesn't look like it normally does anymore since the Novokakhovka Dam was blown. So this is just old satellite image of what it used to look like. The river has diverted differently, and this area of further north. This area is there's a lot more land. There's still some water over in this side of the basin, but there's a lot more. Almost, it's like you could walk across, but you can't. There's still water. There's still a river that flows through it, so that would be incredibly difficult. I mean, you have to swim across it, and the ground is still sopped and muddy. Which a lot of people had said that there might be a chance of a Ukrainian crossing and an attempt on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, but that never really came to fruition because of there's no way they could cross that body of water with the Russians sitting right here. The other part of the Ukrainian offensive had to succeed for some sort of crossing over into the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, but it never happened. So that's that. There's still talks about potentially a Ukrainian operation here, but it's very difficult. I think we did see their big operation and it failed pretty miserably. earlier in the war. So I doubt they're going to do anything with that again. No large changes around Novomihайлivka, except that they ended up capturing at least some of this tree line right here. It's something like this. Let's see. I think it's something like this. So we're just going to tentatively put that like that into purple. And that is what the northern flank of Novomihайлivka looks like. The Russians had pushed in and captured a fortification, I believe that's in this field. This will be green, and I will fully update it when the full update comes out. The only reason it looks like this is because I'm just following the tree lines. I don't like to put front lines in the middle of fields because that's not very realistic when it comes to like what the battlefield is actually going to look like. A lot of times the battlefield, and this update, I know I have it in my brain because I've seen it, other sources reporting it, so I know what it looks like. But I think that the other sources had this line kind of going up through this field, and that just doesn't make sense because there's not going to be a Russian position just like in the open field. It's going to be on one of the tree lines. But yeah, so that's how the situation looks around Novomihайлivka. Again, very difficult, but the Ukrainians are holding on with everything they can. So the fighting is very intense here. The bombardment is extremely heavy. Same with most of the area around Pobeda. I believe that the Russians have moved south here a little bit more as well, just kind of compromising this entire northern flank and attempting to move down this 0532. The Ukrainians are pushing very hard from this direction, trying to prevent any Russian expansion out from Pobeda because remember what we talked about, this high ground right here. If the Russians move down this highway towards Konstantinivka and Perskakivka, that's pretty much a wrap for these two places. And then that opens up the road to Vuhledar. And then once that's open, it's going to be incredibly difficult. Again, Marinka hasn't changed since the last update. Krasnohorivka has not changed. Novelske has not changed. Again, this is a major accomplishment if the Russians can hold it and consolidate it because it opens up the northern flank of Krasnohorivka. Up here in Pervomaiske, we have confirmed Russian advance on this side. I can't remember if I showed you guys this in the last live stream, but this has expanded. So the Russians are moving through. It's likely that this has been probably evacuated and we just haven't got an update. The fighting is probably over here in these buildings. And that means that if you can see right here, this was one of the only logistical roads, I guess you would say, that kept this entire area supplied. Now they have to come through this Crossroad Junction and only this Crossroad Junction. So the Russians can just focus all their fire on here. Holding this area is going to become more and more difficult, but it is still flat, open territory. So it'll be hard for the Russians to move through. And remember, the original line of defense is literally like right here. Like Novelske was the front line. Krasnohorivka was the front line for 9 years or 8 years or whatever. So these are very old fortifications and strong defenses outside of Donetsk. So they're very important. Every little movement here is like 7 or 8 kilometers over here. Like this is nothing. This little movement right here for this Zaporizhia sector, this is like nothing in terms of the defenses and it just doesn't, there's no strategic value in this, right? Over here, these are very, very strong defenses that tie up a lot of Russians and allow the Ukrainians a very easy defense line, at the expense of the Russian casualties that are going to be used to capture them. So these fortifications are very, very important. Okay, moving up to Berdichi, I have updated the entire Avdiivka front. This is in the gray zone. I'm actually going to do my gray zone. I've been meaning to do it on this map for a long time, but Tenenke is entirely in the gray zone and likely fully captured at this point. The Ukrainian sources are still saying that there's some fighting going on in the very edge, but from what I've seen, this area has just been hit with TOS so much and so many glide bombs and stuff that there's just like nothing left, and that the Ukrainians can't really fight here. As well as Ukrainian reports that most of Orlivka or all of Orlivka has been captured. We don't have a geolocation, so the map hasn't been updated, but it makes sense. It was just this little block of houses right here. So, and then up here in Berdichi, we have a lot more movement from the Russians. They captured this whole road and moved up into this section near the cemetery. They also came down around this natural water barrier and have cut off this crossroads that leads into Simkivka. So now Simkivka can no longer be supplied through Berdichi. It has to be supplied back here through Novosilka along this one road right here. But this is a paved road. So this is a very strong supply line, but I'm sure it's been bombed out and is difficult to operate on. But again, this line was supposed to be stabilized. The Russians are again advancing on this line. And remember, this is the line right here, right? So there's nothing to fall back on. This is, once this line is broken, we will see the Ukrainians move all the way back to this line of defense right here, most likely. Ivanivsky, still no change to the map up here. The Ukrainians are fighting hard to keep the Russians from fully capturing it. Once this falls, Klishchivka falls, and then the Ukrainians are in much more difficult position on this front. So that hasn't changed yet. And then a small Russian advance through these forested areas to the edge of Terny. And now the the Russians are about a kilometer away from Terny in two different forested areas. So this zone will become incredibly difficult for the Ukrainians to keep supplied right here. This whole front could collapse very, very quickly if the Russians end up getting into Terny and start progressing up north and south on this road. And then other than that, I think we're good. The only thing I wanted to point out was the recent areas where the Ukrainians have been trying to cross the border. One of them is right here. We've heard a lot about this town. You can see that if the Ukrainians cross the border at all, they've entered into the town. So that's not really like an accomplishment, right? Just trying to get across the border. And the Ukrainians have not penetrated more than 300 meters or so, except potentially one helicopter landing that took place. And I don't remember where they landed. It was right on the border. It might have been Gordivka or it was something with a G. But there was apparently a helicopter landing by the Ukrainians, a little mini Hosmel landing that did not yield any results. They were apparently waiting for reinforcements. This is according to Russian sources. The reinforcements were targeted in the Kharkov region. They never arrived. And then the group that landed and by helicopter was destroyed. Apparently one helicopter was destroyed. Footage will probably come out tomorrow of all of this. And I have a lot to talk about in this region. So that's it for the map right now, though. I'm going to take us back over and we can talk about some things that are going on. Clown, I actually wanted to get your opinion on the recent statement the recent speech, State of the Union, address the nation, whatever you want to call it, by Macron. And what that means for Europe's future, what that means for Ukraine's future. Did he say anything important? What is your takeaways from his little chat?
Honestly, other than a few snippets, I haven't listened to it yet.
This guy.
But from what I gather, there's a lot of people overhyping it. It's like everything else he says. It's a wait and see what he actually does kind of thing.
Yeah. To me, I listened to it again. Translation might be, misconstrued. I'm always very careful because a lot of the things that Putin say get taken way out of context and they're used as headlines. Russia threatens nuclear weapons or whatever. When all he said was, "We're going to follow our nuclear doctrine if the U.S. intervenes in Ukraine or whatever." They always take things out of context. So I'm always very careful with translation. But
Yeah, like there was a story being pushed about how he pledged to send troops to Romania to enter Odessa to fight Russians, and it's like, no,
I mean, there was
no.
nothing actually about that in the speech. He never even got close to saying anything like that. So that was just like a completely faked story. But it got a lot of people scared for a little bit because it's a big deal. But basically, my takeaways from it were that he's saying the same thing that every European leader or voice in the United States who's very strong on the Ukraine project, they all say the same thing. I mean, I'm pretty sure I heard Newland say all of these things like 4 months ago, a year ago.
I mean,
Russia,
they've been talking points for the last 2 years.
yeah,
Russia's the adversary, and if Russia wins, the EU loses credibility. I mean, okay.
which don't ask me how a economic organization loses face because of a Russian military intervention in Ukraine. It's probably because they're responsible for it, right? That's why they're going to lose credibility, is because they propagated this whole conflict and now they're going to lose it. And how stupid does that make you look, right?
I mean, when the Czechs managed to rummage through other people's couch pillows to dig up shells that at exorbitant war profiteering prices of like 2,400 per shell are still cheaper than the EU can produce them, you kind of already look stupid regardless of how it turns out.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, get that unified army going, get your defense sector into gear, and then we'll talk about having credibility. And me, I'm a big proponent of Europe getting its. It would have such a robust defense industry if it didn't undermine itself at every corner, and it just pisses me off that they don't take their own security and defense seriously.
Yeah, no, that is true. It's I don't know. It's this ongoing thing, and all he said was, I mean, the only thing I think he said that was different was there are no red lines. But if you listen to the context in which he says it, the whole thing is about strategic ambiguity. I get it. You don't want to tell your enemy what your plans are, but also strategic ambiguity means that you're very ambiguous with Ukraine as well. Like there might be some backdoor conversations. But I don't feel like that speech did anything. Everybody's pretending like Macron as being some like strong man, but really what he sounds like is like a Baltic country. And I saw a lot of people making this comparison, and I think they were trying to do it as a compliment. But if anybody knows, I mean, it's literally the void. So the void has just
there's a huge difference between France and the Baltics. Namely being that France, has the ability to back up its tough talk, whereas the Baltics are like, one of their presidents was like, "We're not afraid of Russia anymore." Of course, you're not afraid. You're hiding behind NATO. Come out in the open by yourself, and then talk shit, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
But the defense minister Le Cornu just like undermined Macron's speech because he flat out said that putting Western troops on the ground in Ukraine is not on the table.
Yeah. So that was and this comment right here kind of sums it up. I mean, he is trying to be a Napoleon, man. That's what it feels like, but it also feels like, in your personal opinion, and I'm being biased here, but do you think that do you think that France can domestically survive an action like that, sending troops into Ukraine? Because they're dealing with immigration issues, they're dealing with their farmer protests. I don't think France's economy is doing particularly well. And now you're going to start sending troops to Ukraine. Like I'm kind of confused as to how that works.
I don't think they're actually going to send troops like in any official capacity to Ukraine. But yeah, if any European state can survive it, it's France. Their economy is very robust, very centralized too. It's very robust. The farmers' protests are one thing, but this is France. Like, I live in a French-speaking region. I could tell you, protesting is like happens as commonly as people change underwear. It's just something we do, where it's part of the culture.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I feel like that would not play very well domestically. I can't see that the French people and the French government seem at odds. And I don't mean like in their normal sense. I mean in the same way that most populations in Europe seem at odds with their governments right now, that their governments are not representing them. They're not keeping the interests of their own nations in mind. They're, going along with the US's foreign interests and not their own. So I don't know.
That all being said, given that it's France, there's always a possibility that if the government pushes too far, it's May '68 all over again, and they just half the labor force goes on strike and forces the government out, like they did to De Gaulle. But the difference is they actually liked De Gaulle. Nobody likes Macron.
Dude, I think that a bunch of people have organized a little. They're just in my chat. Look at, I see an extremely high number of NAFO individuals. I love that I just live in their head rent free, man. Isn't it so nice?
You have hate watchers. It's hilarious. I can't
Dude,
imagine
literally
wasting this kind of time of my life watching someone I hate.
Could you imagine? Like, that would be like me sitting there and listening to like David talk in a space. No, that's a waste of time. Like, how am I why would I give somebody else engagement and my money, I guess, at the end of the day, right? Because all of these views, I mean, if I'm such a grifter, you guys are enabling my grift. Oh, thank you. Grift King over here because of my NAFO followers. Rock on, buddy. All right, back to our conversation. Sorry, I saw a lot of people saying stupid stuff in the chat. So.
I also love the Vive la France in the in the chat. Like, is that supposed to upset anyone? Like, I fucking love France, dude.
No, it's funny too that they're saying Vive la France when before this conflict they would have never said anything good about France. And
oh yeah, until 2 weeks they were hating on France hard because let's be real, 400 million in aid to Ukraine puts it at the bottom percentile of Europe.
They've literally sent. I mean, they've sent a lot of artillery at least, but they haven't sent any Lestrex. I mean, of all the countries to be very,
they don't have any enough Leclercs to send. They have like 200 in service. That's it.
I will answer this question in a little bit because I'll bring up a topographical map. So
what's interesting to me though is the Césars, because those are hyper expensive boutique SPGs that, like, I remember people were commenting, that it was a waste of an Iskander to hit one, but it costs twice as much as an Iskander as the 6x6 lower cost version. These are stupid expensive. The César.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it's French, so my brain goes to like pronouncing it in French.
No, you're good. You're good. I just didn't know what system you were referring to. I didn't even hear you say the first thing. All right, I'm going to go over to my bookmarks, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff that is going on in Ukraine. Please kick out the NAFO trolls. Yeah, guys, listen, I don't have anybody who is my like dedicated mod right now, so I can't be doing this stuff and doing my moderation on my chat. If somebody wants to mod, come on, send me a DM. We'll get you modding. That's no problem. But I can't do both at the same time. So, all right, go over to the bookmark. Also, let them watch. What they look foolish. They're the ones cheering about failures in Belgorod and whatever. I mean, you should be laughing at them. They are entertainment. Don't think about them as annoying. Don't engage with them. Just laugh at them for what they are. That's all you have to do. That's why I've been successful on Twitter, is because all I do is laugh at them and they can't stand it. So here's the geolocation for all of my NAFO boys. You guys are actually going to learn about some stuff today, because on our side, we actually do work. We do legwork, and we figured out that the good old Russian Legion definitely did not enter Ukraine into this settlement and take this video. They did it on the Sumy side of the border. So congratulations, Ukraine, on taking a propaganda video pretending to be in Russia on your side of the border. The reason why these Russian soldiers are here is this is from the opening days of the war, when the Russians were in the Sumy region handing out humanitarian aid to civilians. So that's what these pictures are of. All right. So these guys never entered Belgorod. This is propaganda, and a lot of you fell for it. Let's see. This is just something funny that I thought that was posted by NAFO, and I thought this was hilarious. The new map of the Baltic states, the void has expanded. Bro, calling France a Baltic state is like prime comedy, and the fact that they didn't mean it in a bad way is just so much more funny in my personal opinion. I know you don't really, Clown, you know, like area is all about the mysterious Baltic void. He's so funny when he talks about that.
I mean, like I said, the difference is France can actually back up the tough talk. The Baltics can't. Like it's, oh, you talk a big game, you're one of us. Okay.
So here's that Baltic Reservoir. Here's the Novakhovka Reservoir. This is the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and this is the reservoir after the dam was broken. So this is it now. This isn't updated. So you can see there's some water down here. It's still providing a barrier. There's no way to cross this with vehicles. You're sitting duck out here. There's still a lot of water. So it didn't dry out, I think, the way that whoever blew it thought it might, because the Russians want a solid water barrier. I mean, it's so much easier to defend. When you have to cross a kilometer of water, it gives you a lot of time to respond. So this is how the reservoir looks now, though, just for your own analytic purposes. All right, let's go. Here is Youre Bastov, a Ukrainian nationalist. He is talking about the recent strike on the Patriot missile system. He's saying 2 launchers and several anti-aircraft missiles were destroyed. Obviously, MIM-104 were destroyed as a result of the defeat of the Patriot anti-aircraft missile battery. Called by the Russian invaders near the city of Pokrovsk, Donetsk region, at a distance of about 50 kilometers. So 9 Ukrainians were killed in this attack, which means that an entire Patriot battery basically lost its crew and its support staff, which is not particularly good. Some say that there was a radar there, some don't. I mean, it looked like a full battery, basically, but we can't clearly show that the radar was hit. So 2 launchers and 9 crew members and support logistics individuals. I thought this was very interesting. Go ahead if you have something to say, Carl.
Yeah, I was enjoying the talk about how the Ukrainian Air Force must have a rat because, Russia found out where the air defense is, or, they could just have better ISR or, better signals intelligence and are able to track them better now.
Yeah.
But by all means, like, purge the Air Force just to be sure.
Yeah, I did see you commenting on that. Yeah, no, go ahead, purge the Air Force. Do it. See if that helps. Because you know what's worse than a spy? Incompetent leadership, dude. And yeah, doesn't make any sense.
I mean, they've been moving air defense to the front, which, to be fair to them, is a ballsy move. Nobody would have expected it. Good for them. They pulled it off. But you also make them vulnerable if you're bringing them to the front and the opponent knows that they're at the front.
Yeah. It doesn't work out super well. But Russian ISR has improved. Obviously, that Patriot battery was literally being watched by a drone 50 kilometers deep. We also had the helicopter, the 2 helicopters that were hit after they were hit by cluster munitions pretty deep. Those were also being watched by drone. And I believe that they might have been hit by a 4-post dropping like Cab 250s. That's what that missile looked like, or that bomb looked like, that ended up hitting the helicopters. So that would be having a large attack UAV in that area would be something new, and it would be a new, I guess, weapon system that the Russians can employ on the battlefield. I can see a third-party nation deploying troops at the Belarus border, maybe to avoid directly facing off with the Russians and free up AFU troops in Donbass. Yeah, and then what happens when they get hit by a missile? Right? what happens when a glide bomb comes across the Belarusian border and hits them? I mean, there's Guarantus, Iskanders, all of that's in range. They're all legitimate targets. They're on the battlefield of Ukraine, right? Why they're freeing up troops to go and serve the east and kill Russians? That's a direct contribution to the war effort. You're a target, right?
I don't see the Europeans. I don't see the Europeans doing something like that. That's
Exactly.
that's much more ballsy from than that we're used to. We might see them line up on the Russian border as a like in their own in from NATO's borders with Russia
Finland,
to
yeah.
put on pressure. It's not going to accomplish anything because the threat of invasion isn't credible. So
because this is what you guys always have to ask yourself: what's the answer, right? What happens if Russia is invaded by a NATO country, right? That you know the answer. What happens if a NATO country engages Russia in Ukraine? Either every single every single person from that country in Ukraine becomes a target, or the country itself is now at war with Russia. And none of those countries want that. That's such an overcommitment. It's not even like, oh, they're weak or whatever. That's just so stupid for the longevity of your political career. It's so stupid for the longevity of your country. It doesn't make any sense. So it's not to do exactly what Macron is doing and have this strategic ambiguity, because he doesn't want to lose in France, right? He wants to threaten the Russians, but he also can't make any commitments because he's not going to be able to follow through on them. So hoping that tough talk and a firm stance equates to a tentative Russia that maybe perhaps doesn't push for Kiev or Odessa.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not an issue of weakness. There's no doubt that if push came to shove and they went in, it would make a difference. They would do damage, but it's where does it escalate from there? Nobody serious actually wants to test that theory and see where it goes, because there's too much potential for it to go out of control, spill out outside of Ukraine, and then we have a shooting war with NATO and Russia, and nobody except the most terminally online actually want that.
Yeah, nobody. Here's the thing: you also have to remind yourself when you're thinking about conflict is who makes money. That's always the biggest thing, because whoever's making the money is the one that wants the war, and they're the ones pushing for the war. Nobody wants a nuclear war. There's not a lot of money to be made in nuclear war, right? That's pretty much the end of the global economy. That's pretty much the end of the global agricultural system. I mean, that's horrible. It doesn't serve anybody's purpose. So going that far makes no sense for either side. That's why it works, right?
Yeah, the value of this kind of rhetoric is it's old school brinksmanship. I mean, it gives pause to your opponent, because you don't know if they're bluffing. Even if you're 99% sure that they are, that 1% is enough to give pause. It might limit how far Putin pushes. It might not. It's playing chicken. It's who's gonna veer out of the way first.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Macron can step back and said, well, while the U.S. was looking for a way out, while Boris Johnson wasn't even around anymore, Olaf Scholz was too chicken shit to send his Tauruses. I was the one standing there. Me and the Baltics, we were the ones standing by Ukraine. So even though the Ukraine project fell, we were there. We were trying. We were getting this support. We were doing this, that, and the other. I mean, it makes sense. I don't blame him for what he said. I think it was smart. Maintaining strategic ambiguity is a smart thing to do. He didn't. I mean, I can tell he's bluffing, but again, like Clown said, if it's only 1%, it still gives pause. He's still doing something. So I don't know. I think he should have been like, psych, negotiate. That would have been a W for Macron.
I mean, I honestly still stand by my assessment of his original speech from last week, where he's basically setting limits. He's not pledging to interfere, but he is saying Kiev or Odessa, and that triggers a response.
Yeah,
But that's a huge it's a huge walk back from 1991 borders.
Yeah, huge. And this is obviously Olaf Scholz. I don't want to cross this line. This is on the supply of Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Smart move by Olaf. He sees the writing on the wall. He knows that this is just a pointless escalation that will do no good for Ukraine, will do no good for Germany. It will hurt a future potential relationship between Germany and Russia, which is still on everybody's mind, because remember, at the end of the day, money is king, and cheap Russian energy was the backbone of the German economy. So, I mean, it's definitely still on everybody's mind to get it back. Will it ever come back? Not while the U.S. has a strangle grip on Europe, but they can always hope. So. But he's smart not to send them, because the difference between Taurus and Storm Shadow and ATACMS is that the Taurus is Germany's premier missile system for like the next decade. They don't have a ton of them, so this is their national security right here that you're talking about. They don't want to give them all away. They don't want the Russians to gain algorithms for the Taurus. They don't want the Russians to gain the technological secrets that the Taurus might have, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I think this is a smart move by Germany, and not because I'm all about Ukraine losing or whatever. No, this is a smart move from Germany in a geopolitical sense, in a military sense. This is something smart from them.
Yeah, it also has to be considered that the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe are in, oh man, to say dire shape would be an upgrade.
Yeah,
it's not a good place. It's not a good place for the armed forces to be. They've let it slide for decades. But the Taurus is kind of like their ace in the hole, and they only have 500 or 600 of those. I mean, yes, the Brits and the Storm Shadows, and everybody makes that comparison. But the Storm Shadow isn't Britain's mainline air to ground missile. It's just not. They're phasing them out of service. That's why they're being sent. It'd be stupid for Germany to send their main armaments over.
So now I'm sorry, I was just reading something. I was listening to you, but did you see the report that Johnson is expected to? They're talking about splitting up the Israeli and the Ukraine aid.
They have to, because they tried passing both through together, and the Democrats don't want to vote for something that involves supporting Israel. They just don't. The question here is figuring out which of the two is the one that requires being bundled with the other to pass.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that one, Azam.
As a general rule, it's just bad practice, I think, to do, at least here in Canada, it's really bad practice to do omnibus bills. It just pisses off your opposition, and just you have better odds of passing individually. It's just you're trying to bundle them to prove a point or score a political win. And
now hear me out.
It doesn't help.
Now hear me out. Does Ukraine aid not pass and Israeli aid passes?
Ouch.
Yeah, that's what I think is going to end up happening, because I don't think that the Republicans are going to let a Ukraine aid bill go to the floor until the border situation is fixed. Like, they need concessions from Biden on the border issue. If the Republicans pass Ukraine aid without getting concessions on the border, the GOP loses. Like, that's basically.
If I understood the bill properly, it's a multi-year aid bill, right?
Mm-hmm. Which means it screws Trump over too if he wants to stop.
See, that's a problem. I don't even think it's less to do with the border. Getting the border stuff done in exchange is a good thing, but I don't think they're gonna let it pass anyway, just because it's an election year and you're committing your opponent to your foreign policy if they win. That is, they're not going to tie their hands on foreign policy like that. It's you want Ukraine funding to go through like much easier and much quicker. Make it a commitment to the end of the year. and much less aid, obviously, because they want to, because the 60 billion is spanned over several years, but get it done for this year. Pass that through, and that the Republicans may well let that through.
It's not what they want, though. They want to force Trump to continue their project.
Of course, it's all electoralism. It's
yeah. Which is,
but I'm just saying, if they wanted it, if Ukraine funding was as high priority to them as they say it is, they would repackage it into something that lasts for until the election, basically, and pass that through. Because if the Republicans refuse that, then you have a cudgel to beat them with. At this point, you don't, because you're just trying to tie their hands into their term.
Yeah. Do you think it passes? I think everybody thinks it's going to pass. It's a military-industrial complex, man. People just.
I mean, it's hard to say it's not. It depends on the Republicans. Like, I don't know partisan American politics very well, so I can't predict how the Republicans are going to act.
Dude, if they just, I mean, I'm not a Republican, guys. I think that the party is a bunch of old boomers, like both parties are. Like, they don't offer me anything. But I think that the Republicans, from a strategic standpoint, thinking about what they should do for their party, is they should just screw Biden over for the next 9 months and then do whatever they want after that. Because all of this is on the Democrats. Nobody really cares about Ukraine. I hope you guys don't think anybody in the United States actually cares about Ukraine, especially not the people in the government. They don't give a shit. Like, they don't care. So drop all any of those notions. They just want to make money, and they want their constituents to vote for them again. So that's what everything is in U.S. politics, is lobbying and running for your next election is basically what U.S. politics is, and that's how you can boil everything down. There is no want to help Ukraine. Nobody cares. There will be another Ukraine in a couple years. And then, everybody's going to pretend to care then too. One of the questions we got asked was the assault on the Chasiv Yar. How difficult would it be? Once the Russians capture Ivanivsky and they captured this high ground, they should be able to begin moving more aggressively towards this high ground on the backside of Chasiv Yar. If they can cross this canal and gain a bridgehead. I believe that's why they've started pushing down here on this edge of Toretsk, is to get a bridgehead across the canal and then work their way up both sides of the canal, get onto this high ground, and then push in on this southern axis. You might also see a push up onto this northern high ground along the canal, and then working both ways down the canal towards Chasiv Yar. But Chasiv Yar is on a very, very high elevation compared to everything else around it. So it's kind of like a fortress on a hill, and it will be difficult for the Russians to capture, barring a Ukrainian collapse or incredible manpower issues or something, or a shell shortage that completely cripples them, something like that. Here's another question. We've already talked about our Ukraine dream attempt to capture the Zaporizhia plant again. UA just recycling their desperate attempts, border Kerson, etc. Yeah. It is what it is, right? There's no benefit of sending these guys into Belgorod. I just talk about that right now, because that's the nonsense that's happening. It's not accomplishing anything. It's really not making Putin look particularly weak. If they went in and actually captured a town and they were making the border guard look foolish, and that would be different. But the last two, what I would consider probing attacks, didn't really result in anything significant. I think that the Ukrainians figured out that the Russians have built a pretty significant fortification network across the border. And what they walked into was sort of the security zone of that fortification network. And they got rocked by it. Russian ISR is so much stronger now, so everything behind the lines is also getting targeted constantly. The whole day there has been air raid in Sumy, Kharkov, and Chernigov regions, because that's where the Ukrainians are staging to go on the attack, which, by the way, prediction for everybody. Okay, I'll talk about this in just a second. What was I saying? I got distracted. Oh, air raids. In those regions, that's where all the staging is happening for a push into Kharkov, Belgorod, and Kursk. Belgorod and Kursk. The Ukrainians are likely going to go on a major assault tonight, as today is the beginning of the Russian elections in Russia, 15th through the 17th. So now is when they're going to really throw whatever reserves in the region they have at this and try to actually make an impactful push. But I don't think it's going to work out very well just because of the amount of Russian defense forces in that region. I mean, Akhmat is there. You have Russian conscripts in the region, and you have, air assets, right? There's still glide bombs falling. There's still Ka-52s flying around, all that. So the Ukrainians just really don't have a ton of options to actually go into Belgorod region or Kursk. And I don't know why they're trying. It doesn't make any sense. If they fail, I feel like the downside of them failing is that that Putin will look competent, even through his election. He did an election while Russia was getting invaded, right? I feel like that's a good look for Putin. If it works for the Ukrainians and they actually accomplish something, that's a bad look for Putin, right? But as of right now, as the situation stands, the border security services look very competent. Putin doesn't look like he's phased at all by this. Russia is under attack in the literal sense, which is like a very big thing for Russians, and it doesn't really seem to be bothering very many people. That's how you know Ukraine is definitely on the back foot and the information space has turned around dramatically, is that all of this is happening and there's not a single Russian doomer anywhere. The Russians are the first ones to doom, right? So if you don't see the Russians getting all upsetty spaghetti about these incursions or whatever, then
What's bizarre though is that the way it's framed is it keeps being tied to the election. Like, is it going to change? Does anybody believe it's going to change the result? You think you're going to vote out Putin over this?
I think it's just more of a statement, right? Internationally, that we interrupted this election. Like, well, I don't know how that's even a good thing, considering Ukraine isn't even having an election. It's really weird that you're not having an election and now you're trying to interfere in a different election, even if you think it's fake. It's Russia is having one more fake election than Ukraine is having, so
it's kind of a goofy use of resources too. Like, isn't there anything else on the battlefield to dedicate resources to rather than a failed push into Belgorod?
I think they're trying. I think they're trying to escalate. I think that's all that they're trying to do right now, is to get some sort of reaction from the Russians so that they can get some sort of NATO commitment at the end of it. I think that's the goal. Hey, Zeg, how are you doing?
Good. How's it going, guys?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. So what have you guys been touching on? This incursion, this disaster? I don't know. Who do you think? And there's a lot of commotion about whether these were Russians or Ukrainians conducting the raid. Both, right? I would assume both. But if they are Russians, it really doesn't even matter because they're sort of like dissident.
They're literally neo-Nazis. So, like,
yeah,
those brigades, that free Russian Legion brigade, those are literally all neo-Nazis. Even pro-Ukrainian accounts are saying, I don't know why you guys are cheering for these people. They are Russian neo-Nazis that came into Ukraine. Yes, there are neo-Nazis in Russia. They exist in every single country. Ukraine is the only country where they celebrate one as their national hero and also, have openly neo-Nazi military brigades in their armed services. So that's the difference. Their supreme commander was supporting or had a picture of a painting of Stefan Bandera in his office. That's not the best look. Personally, No matter what, I hope this war ends with peace talks. Me too, brother. Get the peace talks going. Get Ukrainians home. Get the Russians home. There doesn't need to be this war. It's ridiculous. It's just Slavs killing Slavs, and it's super unfortunate. I'll answer this question. You can't even push out less than a battalion of the Free Russian Legion. Yeah, there's like a few dozen men. Like it's not a big organization. So this attack is definitely being supported by regular AFU troops into Russian territory. This is not just Russian whatevers. And even if it was just Russian whatevers, they're fighting on behalf of the Ukrainian government, using Ukrainian equipment and using Ukraine as a staging point. They're AFU by all intents and purposes. Question: how far do you feel government censorship and propaganda goes in our country? This is a good question. Canada, it's much worse. In the United States, we are teetering on the abyss of 1984. I feel like we're not there yet, but the way that leadership is talking right now, it's going to be more about censorship, more about silencing opposition. Part of why I think they're trying to ban TikTok, I think that there's a couple of reasons they're trying to ban TikTok. They tried to do it for a long time. Number one, TikTok is absolutely eating Facebook and other large tech companies' lunch. They destroy them in like every category. So TikTok is very successful. US companies don't really like the idea of a Chinese company beating them out in their own market. So that's a primary. Remember, always think about the money when you're talking about these things. The second
What
thing
I find amusing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think it has almost nothing to do with spying, which is funny that that's what they like make it all about. I don't think it has anything to do with that. If the bill was directed only at foreign companies, they would say that in the bill. It does not, which means that it's going to be another censorship bill where they basically choose what is the truth and what isn't the truth. And that is very scary for me, and it makes me very uncomfortable about the future of this country.
Yeah, what I find goofy about the whole TikTok discourse is the things that the talking points about it are all just bare basic mobile application functionality that's really scary if you read it in a technical description kind of way and you're a tech boomer. Like it accesses the internet through my home network. It has access to my files, contacts, and location. Yeah, bro, everything on your phone does.
I know. That's literally, I don't think people understand how.
And here's the best part: all the data for TikTok is stored in servers in Texas run by Oracle Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in America, held by an American company. The
1.5 billion
cannot access it.
Yep. 1.5 billion they spent on that. So it has nothing to do with spying. It has nothing to do with that. It's probably something to do with the Israeli lobby not liking that they can't control the information and how popular TikTok is.
That's part of it, because the thing is, an American company, a Chinese company doesn't have to comply if the American government asks for the data.
Yep.
An American company does.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think that's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about having access to the data for themselves. But then there's also Zuck, who's been pushing for this for years.
Yep.
So it could just be Zuck doesn't want the competition.
He's getting rocked by it. This is a good question. Kalibrated or Clown, also Zag. I know the media is drastically overstating the attacks on Russian oil refineries. I was also curious what the real damage was. Okay, so I like to talk about this. The refineries, some refineries have been hit, mostly very close to the border. On this western part of Russia. There are refineries in other parts of Russia, but also the attacks you see these constant, like you're constantly inundated with fire here, a fire here, a fire here, a fire here. What you have to remember is a lot of these oil refinery attacks that they're talking about happened months ago and they've been repaired. They're overstating the damage that is happening to these oil refineries. I'm not saying that they're not taking a hit, but Russia, I mean, it's clear that Russia's oil revenue is not dropping at all. Their exports, I haven't seen any data to suggest that their exports have dropped at all from these attacks. And I mean, they're making more money than they've ever made off of if they're even selling less gas, they're making more money than they've ever made by selling it to India, and then India sells it to the EU. So, I mean, it really is not making a huge amount of difference on the battlefield.
If you want to gauge what effect it's having on the actual oil production process, look at Brent crude oil price, because there's nothing in the price of Brent crude in the fluctuations lately that suggests there's a significant impact on supply. If a huge chunk of Russia's capacity had been blown up, you would see Brent skyrocketing because supplies tanking, and OPEC Plus is on his third or fourth supply freeze over the last 2 years. You would expect it to reflect on our prices. The prices are stable, then supply is stable.
Yeah, and again, watch the money. Just watch the money. That's the easiest way to figure out what's happening. You know why Ukraine is short on artillery shells? Because nobody's actually building the factories they need to build to increase artillery shell production, because the orders aren't coming in, because nobody wants to actually do it. Like, this is why that they're struggling with this, is because it costs money to do these things, and it's not guaranteed that the Ukraine conflict is going to be going on a month from now, a year from now. So why are you going to build a factory for this one purpose and then close the factory when the purpose is served? Like, the orders aren't there. So there's just no, I mean, if you just got to follow the money, always follow the money.
Dude, I love these guys in your chat who are like noted economist von Clausewitz, because I mentioned supply and demand. High tech, really advanced macroeconomic
Hell
shit.
yeah,
right there,
brother.
man.
Where'd you go to school for that?
Literally shit you learn in high school.
Yeah, in my senior economics class. I think I learned it before high school, but that's okay. Russian border zone along the Kharkov-Sumy border. Yeah, I mean, I think both of those regions are going to be incorporated into the Russian Federation anyway. So yeah, I think that this will be a great pretext for Russia to do whatever they want on that northern border now. What is anybody going to say? We're literally being invaded by Ukraine on this border. Sorry. You lost your privileges. That's kind of like the situation. So I don't know. Yes, I do think that's definitely going to happen. It's not going to be a buffer zone, though. It's going to be an oblast. It's not going to be a buffer. The Iskander question. Do you want me to talk about?
Yeah, I remembered your question, Bubbles. I have it in the back of my head.
Yeah. So the difference between Iskander. Well, first,
Iskander is a different class of weapon. It's surface to surface. It's excess of Mach 5, I believe. It's just it's its own thing. The other three are relatively similar to each other. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Taurus has better penetration capabilities than the others. And from what I've been reading, some U.S. military guys on a Twitter have been suggesting that this Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles might have geofencing that the Taurus lacks, so they could limit it to being able to target within a certain area only.
Yeah, which is partially part of the reason why they don't want the Ukrainians to have them, because they think that they're going to instantly use them on Russian proper territory. So, I agree with that. So, in terms of classifications, you have ballistic missiles, which fly on a ballistic trajectory. That's an Iskander. That's a ATACMS is a ballistic missile system. Those Iskander and ATACMS are very similar in their function. The ones that the Ukrainians get are the cluster munition variants that are much shorter range. That's different. And then, Taurus, Scalp, and Storm Shadow are all very similar model, missile model designs. Taurus is definitely the most advanced. Storm Shadow and Scalp are being cycled out. That's why they were so agreeably sent to Ukraine. That's not Britain. Britain has a new missile up the pipeline that they're working on. And so that, I mean, that's the difference. Taurus has a much longer range as well than the Scout does, which means that, again, this weapon system could be used to hit something very, very sensitive in Russia that could potentially start a nuclear war, right? So that's why that's why they don't want them to have them. And then the geofencing thing is also probably correct. The Storm Shadow Taurus is like, and the Storm Shadow and Taurus are like Russian cruise missiles, like the Caliber or the, I mean, it's different than the Caliber. It's a completely different missiles, but in the functionality, a Caliber cruise missile or like a KH-101 is also a similar style cruise missile, except they have way longer range than the Storm Shadow does. Also, this guy says Kalibrated is a CCP shell. What have I said that is shilling for China? Does anybody know? I'm confused. Clown?
Doesn't make much sense, does it?
Yeah, I don't know what I said. I mean, sometimes I defend China, but I don't think I said anything even about China today. It's a very weird one to be called. It'd be like, you're Israeli shill. It's like, okay. Anything else? All right. If you guys have some questions, get some questions in. Your opinion on the BMP Terminator, are they effective? Yes, they.
Yeah.
I mean, it's two big guns on a T-72 chassis. It's kind of hard to make it not work. They're very tough. I think that they need to be retrofitted with an extremely potent electronic warfare system, because I think their biggest weakness is FPV drones. And obviously mines, but that can be dealt with in different ways. And I really, really do think that they need to be put into a higher rate of production. I don't know what their rate of production is right now, but we don't see a ton of them because they're a newer system. So I haven't seen a lot of emphasis put on them, though. I think that they're expensive and just costly to lose on the battlefield. So I don't know if we're going to see a ton more of them. That this is more of like a cool peacetime, weapon system that gets used in like Syria or something, on a battlefield where they have a stronger advantage in like air supremacy and stuff like that. It's difficult to use these when there's 30,000 FPV drones flying all over the place. All right, let's see. Get Danny on here. Guys, whoever you want to be on here, go send them a message and say, hey, get on. Or go into their chats and be like, hey, have Kalibrated on, or go on Kalibrated. I have invited some people on, but people are always busy. And Danny is constantly traveling, so he's also constantly making 9 videos a day and needing 45 thumbnails. So let's see.
Need to get Mr. Chen on here.
Mr. Chen.
Who's that?
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Chen Wehua.
I'm trying to think. Who is? I don't know who that is.
The guy who's known for just ratioing every political figure on.
Oh yeah. Okay. I didn't know that was his name. The one that is always like, "You dumb bitch."
That's the one.
Yeah. What are your feelings on the Houthis having hypersonic, not supersonic, hypersonic capabilities? Pray
I'll
for the
believe
Navy.
it when I see it.
Yeah, I don't know if they have it. It sounds like something to keep the U.S. at bay. I don't know if the Iranians would really transfer ballistic or hypersonic missiles, but of all the times and places to give somebody a weapon to test against a U.S. ship, I mean, they're already firing at them. What's gonna? I mean, like, what difference does it make, right? They're already engaging the U.S. Navy, so I don't know. Of all of the asymmetrical escalations that Iran could entertain, I think this is probably the smartest one. Giving the Houthis something that forces U.S. ships or coalition ships to back off of the Red Sea. That would be an interesting move.
I'm just gonna answer a question I saw in chat. I have a Syrian flag because half my family's from Syria.
Don't listen to him. I think most of his family is from Chicago.
Chicago and Latakia, yeah.
Southside Latakia, dude. Well, let's see.
Well, I mean, if you mirror Chicago, the map, you get Lebanon, and my mom did grow up in Beirut, so
nice.
As we call it, the Chicago of the Mediterranean.
Was the Pope put on the Ukrainian kill list after the peace call? No, I believe that was fake. That is not. That's not a good move. Don't put that guy on a kill list. But obviously the sentiment is there because somebody faked it very quick. So they want him on there. The biggest mistake we've made is pushing Russia closer to China, don't you think? Yeah, that was the whole purpose of this Ukraine project, was to weaken Russia so much that they could be basically controlled like at the end of the 90s. And that's not what ended up happening. The sanctions didn't work. The military intervention or the proxy war didn't pan out. And now France is saying, hey, we're going to have to go fight the Russians because we're losing and we don't want to be embarrassed. So the second NATO troops, I've said this the entire time, the second NATO troops enter Ukraine, the West is lost. The West is lost. It's over. Unless it's to support a Ukrainian push into Russia that is on the back of the Russian military collapse and the coup in Moscow that removes Putin. NATO troops entering Ukraine is a failure. That's not how you fight proxy wars.
Yeah, I've been saying for the better part of the last year and a half that, okay, weakening Russia as a strategic objective, sure, like I get it. It would have been foolish to not try and see that opportunity. But where it becomes a strategic blunder is you drive them into China's arms. And that closes several vulnerabilities that China had, mostly in supply. They're no longer as reliant on Malacca as they were, because now they get their energy through the power of Siberia. So you lose the effectiveness of blockading Malacca if push comes to shove. It's they have their entire northern and eastern flank accounted for, because you'd have to go through Russia to get at them from there. Russia would have been a very, very useful partner in trying to contain China, but it's too late for that now.
Yep, way too late. They messed up big time. Let me think. Did we talk about everything?
There's one thing we didn't. It's something I've been keeping an eye on, the Ukrainian mobilization bill. That's
oh yes,
like thousands upon thousands of amendments to it. Kind of, they need to make up for their mobilization shortfalls. It's unfortunate, and a lot of people like resisted this because it's a really reductive way of looking at it. You hear mobilization, short manpower issues, you think, oh, because they're all dead. No, not because they're all dead, because you need to rotate out those people who've been in trenches for 2 years. They have no fighting capability or morale left. They need to be taken out of the front, but you can't do that unless you have people to replace them with. Mm-hmm. On top of that, there's the KIAs, the wounded. It's not a... And at this point, they have to mobilize the under 27s, which nobody wants to do because you're selling the country's future. They're trying to stratify society by, like, you pay a tax on top of your taxes and you're supporting a war effort, but if you can't, then you get mobilized. So, I guess getting rid of all the poor. The bill hasn't passed yet, but when it does, but if and when it does, that's when we could expect to see, Ukraine try something big.
Yeah. Do you see the war expanding beyond Ukraine? No, I don't. I don't think that anybody has the appetite for that at all. I think that there is this idea that there could potentially be a war beyond Ukraine. But in my personal opinion, I think that everybody is going to be kind of exhausted at the end of what the Ukraine conflict is. The West, especially, they're not going to be looking for a fight at all. And Russia doesn't want to fight in the first place, in my personal opinion. They don't want a war with Europe. Europe is a economy that they can profit off of for the foreseeable future. Why would they want to cut off their connection to Europe? It makes no sense. Again, follow the money. Who has money to gain? Russia was giving their oil and gas to the European Union for a very, very reasonable price. The U.S. came in, blew up Nord Stream. Now, who supplies Europe with a good amount of their gas? It's just so easy. You just have to look at where the money's going. It's always just where the money's going.
Yeah, these oil infrastructure attacks. I'm not sure if the people cheering for them understand what the repercussions of repeated degrading of the Russian oil industry. The Russians will always have enough for the domestic market. That's not a problem. But the export market, Europe still buys a good amount of gas and oil. Those prices will only come up. Anyone purchasing from them, the prices will go up. And they'll still have the same demand. So the Russians will end up making more money from these strikes potentially. So I just think everything has two sides to it. And I don't think that these attacks are nearly as bad as, some of these Ukrainian channels are suggesting. Right. So it's not a good look, but it's also not that consequential. And like I said, I think if you do mess with the Russian supply, it's just going to increase the cost for all of the
Yo, look at this delusion, bro. I like how they all came back. Look, they all started coming back because I don't know what happened. Follow the money, right? As Russia has been removed from the world market. Yeah, because Europe is definitely
Asia is a different planet.
Because Europe is definitely not buying Russian oil right now. For sure, they're not. There's definitely no Russian oil being peddled through India and sold at a higher rate to the European Union. Definitely not. That's not happening.
What are you talking about, bro? Asia does not exist. It's not a real place.
It's goofy, man. I don't understand it's just weird hopes. Like weird, like that it's divorced from reality. Oh well, I'm done talking about NAFO. That's enough. All right. Let's see. Any more questions? If you guys have some questions, get them in quick before we wrap this up. Let's see. Block them. The thing is like I should get a mod, for my YouTube chat.
Why crazy comments?
I don't know. It's just kind of destroys conversation. Piotr, I didn't see you. We're almost done. Would you like to hop on tomorrow, though? I was thinking about doing a roundtable earlier in the day, probably like 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm sorry, on Saturday. Did you want to hop on? We're doing I thought it was Friday for some reason. We're doing a roundtable. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So roundtable at 12 o'clock on Saturday, guys. Piotr will be one of the guests. You heard it here first. Obviously,
awesome.
Clown Sag, you are both invited as well.
Awesome. Always fun to shoot the shit with Piotr.
Can I give an update on the Palestine conflict? I mean, I can give a generalized update. I don't follow that conflict quite as closely just because it makes me very sad. I don't think it's horrible. Like, Ukraine is terrible. Ukraine should not be happening. Ukraine, I don't want this war to continue at all. But this war is like gut-wrenching, and I just have no appetite for it at all. And it never improves either. In the Ukraine conflict, when one side does something that they shouldn't do, everybody is doing their best geolocation work, looking at every shadow, everything, figuring out who was right, who was wrong. Down here, it doesn't matter. There's just so much hate. It doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. Everybody is right and everybody is wrong down here, and they're all just killing each other. And it's pretty gnarly. But basically, northern Gaza has been basically wiped off the map. There's not much left. Khan Yunis, I think that there's still some fighting, but it's mostly died down, I think, for the most part. And now there's Rafah, which is the last large urban settlement. It's on the border with Egypt. Egypt is very concerned that if the Israelis go into Rafah, all of those civilians will pour into Egypt, into the Sinai, which is not something that Egypt wants. Egypt does not have the capabilities to deal with that many refugees. So that's, they don't want that. The U.S. has said that the Rafah, going into Rafah, invading it is a red line for the Biden administration. But then he also said at the exact same time that there was no red lines. Here, I'll invite you. Hold on just a second, Peter.
Now they're building this floating pier, which of course the Israelis don't like that idea either.
Which is interesting because I sent you a link, Peter. Which is interesting because that's just, to me, like saving face. Like, oh, we're still supplying the bombs that are bombing the people who we're delivering humanitarian aid to. It's like getting yours on the way in and the way out. It's wild. I can't believe that you're like, here's JDAMs, but also here's food and water for the people who are getting JDAM'd.
It's such a weird look. You can't do both. I mean, you can, obviously they are doing it, but
it's because, if you know what it's because of, it's because the electorate is so down on Biden right now. The Democrats do not approve of what's happening in Israel, and Biden isn't doing anything about it, and that might legitimately lose him the re-election. Is this nonsense in Gaza? But the Israelis are saying that they're going to invade Rafah. They've said that they're going to do it. They're going to finish it, which is basically, in my personal opinion, the final genocide of Gaza. And then they'll move to the West Bank eventually. Where is the West Bank? West Bank's over here, right?
You think they're going to make incursions and invade the West Bank?
Yeah, I imagine. I think that they're...
I mean, if that happens, that's a much different issue because Hamas is a virtually non-existent...
it's not about Hamas.
The West Bank, but I think the international community and especially the rest of the Arab world will basically start to vigorously destabilize and proxy war against Israel and all these things. It would become a regional conflict, and I just don't think Israel has the political capital in that region to make a move like that.
I think that they're basically at the end of their rope, where they're going to finish Rafah. They're going to probably go into southern Lebanon. I think that they're on a war path right now. I don't think that there's anything that's going to stop them either.
Yeah, I think the capabilities of Hezbollah are far more significant and potent than those of Hamas, and I think a war with Hezbollah would lead to significantly more IDF casualties that would be publicized by.
Oh yeah, no,
Hezbollah,
I'm not saying. Hey, listen, I'm not saying it's smart, but what the way I look at it is, Netanyahu is not going to be very popular after this is over. He's not particularly popular now. He's not popular with his U.S. constituents. He's not, and after this is over, you're coming back to an Israel that is still going to be dealing with all of the issues that were present before this conflict started. People forget that October the 7th kind of protected Israel from the internal power struggles that they were having. Those are not going to go away just because this ends or whatever. And it's very clear that the Biden administration doesn't want Bibi in anymore. They want somebody else in there. And I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I think that they're on a war path now where they've stopped listening to what the U.S. has to say. They've stopped They're just going to do what they're going to do.
Well, did you see a prominent Israeli politician today said that the only people who have a say in what the Jewish state does are Jews, and anyone who's not has no business commenting on the actions that we take.
And
So,
and guys, don't get
that's
me wrong.
yeah.
I'm not a Zionist fan, so that's the start. I'm not a supporter of Hamas or anything. I just don't like watching kids die, so that's why I don't cover this conflict. When kids die in Ukraine, it is a horrible, horrible event, and it's very recognizable because kids don't die that often in Ukraine. But in Israel, it was like every other day I was watching babies getting pulled out of rubble, and I couldn't do it anymore. So I stopped covering it. It doesn't matter because none of what I say changes anybody's mind. Everybody knows what's happening, and if you don't, I mean, can't be helped. Well, computer.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
No,
Hi.
I mean yes.
Yeah.
I'm just messing with you.
I would have my camera on, but it's
You're good, man.
1:20 here. So yeah, just a couple of things on Israel. So Bibi he's not popular. If you pretend that October 7th never happened, this chap would have not been in power beyond this date because he was trying to effectively completely overhaul the democratic system of Israel, and he was trying to do that by basically politicizing the judicial system. And why is he doing this? Because he wants to, one, avoid himself being indicted for massive corruption and money laundering charges, but two, because he has the inspiration to sort of follow Putin and Orban, right? First Orban and then Putin, in the sense of Orban is a stepping stone to Putin, because Orban's been doing what Neuho is trying to do for 10 years. Hungary has undergone a huge democratic backsliding, and the political system has been monopolized, the judicial system has been politicized, and the media has been sort of influenced as well. And Bibi, he's been prime minister more or less for about 15 years collectively through many different terms, and he wanted to try to just basically make his legacy in infamous, and he can run the thing for as long as he wants. But Israelis are very proud of their democracy, and they didn't like it. And Bibi won in the end of 22, and he got into bed with some really deplorable people. So whether or not you like Israel or you're Palestine, this chap was really getting into bed with some far right. Bibi's pretty right wing, but his counterparts are like fucking through the window of the right aisle, right? And all of this just made, I think, Palestinians, Hamas, whoever it was, feel that they needed to do something quicker. Again, I'm insinuating a bit, I'm speculating, but I definitely think that the events that happened at the end of 22 had an impact in what led up to October 7th, because before that you had Benny Gantz, you had Bennett, you had a couple of other more moderate people, and they were more likely to be sort of open to two-state solution, more open to sort of engaging with the Palestinians or whoever it was. So Bibi's definitely a detriment at this point. A lot of hardline Israelis think I'm some kind of Hamas supporter because I say that. It's just bullshit. Anyway, that's the domestic side. As for the whole situation, I mean, Aidan always gives, Scott always gives a great, rundown. It's pretty much what he said. I mean, right now there is not really, I think, a risk of a regional war. I just don't see it anymore. The tensions with the northern border and Hezbollah were bad, but I just don't see it as bad as it was, say, even 2 weeks ago or a month. Hezbollah is to your point, Scott, it's a fucking, oh no, Zag, I think you said it, but they are completely different entities. Hezbollah is more powerful than half of NATO, in the sense of there are half of NATO is less powerful, and half of NATO's members are less powerful than Hezbollah. It's insane. They've got 150,000 rockets. They are a political machine. They are a basically de facto, what do you want to call it, gatekeeper for Iran's interests in this part of the region. Iran doesn't want to lose Hezbollah, and Hezbollah doesn't want to lose Hezbollah, in the sense that they don't want to lose Lebanon, they don't want to lose anything. So I really don't think Hezbollah is going to do anything. They would have done already.
I don't think
Yeah.
Hezbollah is going to do anything. I think that the Israelis are going to go into southern Lebanon.
That makes three of us there.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they've been talking about it nonstop, and the hardliners are all getting their way. All they want in the entire world right now is to create that buffer zone. They have not stopped talking about creating a 20, 30 kilometer buffer zone on the southern border of Lebanon, so that they don't have to deal with Hezbollah. It's like a Hezbollah zone, is what they're calling it.
I don't know.
I think it's a horrible idea. I think it's the worst decision that they can make, and I hope they don't do it, because again, it's just going to lead to more innocent deaths.
I think there's two things I'd say to that. I think, and it goes for the Ukrainian stuff, which is, when people hear me, I think they think that because I support Ukraine's independence, I therefore am obtuse or unaware of the reality of the war. Yeah. Right? There's a difference between what I want to happen and what I realistically think is going to happen, right? Yes. So any of you listening, thinking that just because I think Ukraine should not really be dominated by the Russians doesn't mean that I think the Russians are doing a better job right now on the battlefield. Those two things aren't the same, right? Yeah. I've never admitted or disagreed that Russia is still the more powerful military. That who the fuck would think that? Not think that, right? But it's that's different to what I want to happen, right? You got the ideological and you got the realism, and it's the same with Israel Palestine. Realistically, could the Israelis do that? Yeah, they fucking could, and they could damn well do so any minute. I don't want it to happen because I think it's absolutely the worst idea possible, and why I personally want BB out, because if you get BB out and you get a more reasonable person in, no, I'm not saying something Hamas should be negotiated with, but I think you would ultimately reduce the likelihood of a regional war, which is what I'm really worried about. But I still don't think it's likely, to be honest. Anyway,
and that comes to this question: will the conflict extend into two-thirds Arab countries, into other Arab countries? I don't think so. I especially don't think that it's going to expand. But I think that if it's kind of circumstantial, in my personal opinion. If they go into Rafah and they clean house and they do a really good job, and the backlash isn't that significant, because I'm sure Rafah is going to happen. They're already talking about it. That it's already being geared up. And the reason why it's probably going to happen is because the U.S. is saying this is a red line for us. Do not go into Rafah. That means that the Israelis want to do it. They want to go in. If the backlash isn't extremely severe towards Israel on this, I think that they will move everything to the north and then start applying pressure to Hezbollah. That's my personal opinion. I think that the Israelis want to finish this, because this is the time to do it. If they were ever going to do it, they've already committed in Gaza. So
Scott,
I agree with Piotr in that Hezbollah does not want the fight. I don't think realistically the Israelis want the fight, but
Iran doesn't want it either. Nobody actually wants this, but the hardliners want blood. Yeah. And I think they vastly underestimate Hezbollah's capabilities, because Hezbollah is not Hamas. These are not the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's one thing I want to draw people's attention to, which is last night there was a very important article in the Financial Times about, I don't know if anyone saw it, but basically the US and Iranians have had high-level sustained, and I emphasize that word a lot because it's not just happened once, it's happened a lot of times, secret talks. So at the highest level of intelligence and diplomacy, you've got the two main protagonists, or whatever, actors, the Iranians versus the Americans, because let's be honest, Israel is an extension of America in this example. They are talking, and that shows me that the Americans are so or at least the Biden administration is so untrusting of the Netanyahu administration or war cabinet right now, that they're having to go straight to their arch nemesis, the Iranians, to ensure that the Israelis and the Iranians don't do something directly.
Yep.
So that's pretty major. And I think, if anything, means that we're not going to see a regional war, thank goodness,
Yeah.
even more.
I mean,
But
I could see, I think that a small skirmish between Hezbollah and Israel, and I'm not saying it's going to remain small. I'm not, that's not what I'm saying by any means, but I think that that's very much different than a war between Iran and Israel directly, which that obviously could escalate into that. But I totally agree, Piotr. They've been meeting with the Iranians and communicating with them very directly for a very long time. I believe that even the retaliatory strikes we saw by the U.S. in Syria and Iraq were all telegraphed very clearly to the Iranians what was going to happen. That's why the Iranians didn't react, or the Iranian militias in the region didn't react that way. It's not because they didn't want to. It's because it was obvious that the escalation of killing Americans needed to be, compensated for, I guess, in a way. And I think it was very much communicated what was about to happen in terms of what the U.S. was going to target. But these backdoor conversations are definitely happening. And I mean, you can just see it in the recent Biden administration choice to what was it? What is the exact term? They removed the sanctioning, which allowed $10 billion in foreign assets to be freed up for Iran. So the U.S., who is talking about Iran being this, three-headed beast, this hydra. Every time you cut off a head, another two grow back, sort of thing. They've just given them $10 billion in economic relief, basically. So obviously, there's backdoor dealings going on. And my personal opinion on it is that the U.S. cannot afford another war right now. They're doing everything in their power to prevent a war in Yemen with the Red Sea stuff. They're trying desperately to prevent a war, an expanded war in the Middle East, because they can't afford it right now. Militarily, they can't afford it right now. I'm not saying that the U.S. can't go in and fight a war, but in terms of supporting another proxy war, they can't do that while dealing with Ukraine. They can't even deal with Ukraine right now alone. So they're definitely...
they also still need a working budget.
Yeah, so they're definitely playing very carefully. They're tiptoeing around, and it's an election year, so you do not want to be getting into a new Middle East war as Joe Biden, or supporting an expanded Israeli war where more civilians are dying, because that's not going to play well with the Democrats during an election year. That's not what you want. So I agree with Piotr's assessment that there are backdoor dealings going on with Iran, and the communication is very open. Let's get to this question. How far do you guys think Russia will go in Ukraine? And then this will be the last one we'll do today. Everything east of the Dnieper to Odessa and Lvov. I've said for a long time that I think that Odessa will likely be captured by the Russians. I think the reason the French are putting so much emphasis on it is for that exact reason. I think that they know what the Russian plans are. But yes, everything east of the Dnieper, maybe not everything, like this portion of Kiev, perhaps this portion of Cherkasy, which would create an opportunity for the Russians in the future as well to potentially intervene into whatever rump is left of Ukraine by having, this portion of the country remaining in Ukraine and being geographically isolated by the river. I think that is a definite possibility. I think it might look a little bit smaller than what some people have mapped in terms of the overall extent, but I think that in terms of what the Russians hope to achieve, this doesn't mean this is what's going to happen. Obviously, there's outside players, a million different things can happen, but I think something along the lines of this makes sense, something like this. And then maybe not Kryvyi Rog, but just enough of Odessa and then connecting to Transnistria. So something like that, which is not...
I think that's a bit ambitious, personally.
I'm not saying it's not ambitious. I'm saying this is what I think the Russian goal, I think that's what the Russian, a full Russian victory in Ukraine would look like. In terms of how far do I think, I honestly think that is a realistic possibility. I think that what you're going to see is not a war. You're not going to see a war for these places. That's not how this is going to look. It's going to be a war over here. The war is going to be entirely fought in this eastern portion, perhaps in the south right here. And then once the Ukrainian army ceases to exist, the Russians will just take whatever they want. That's how I've always seen it. No fight for Odessa. No, nothing like that. Just a eventual surrender, right?
Well,
when you
they'll have to change, the local leadership in a lot of these places.
We're literally talking about changes to the mobilization, the constitution in Ukraine, that is the end of Ukraine, right? If they commit
But that's going to be the deciding factor. That's going to be the deciding factor of how far the Russians are able to get.
Mm-hmm.
It hinges a lot on whether Ukraine is able to mobilize.
Yeah, if the Ukrainians do something smart and perhaps pull back behind the Dnieper and then put up a bunch of defenses, then Odessa is a pipe dream, in my personal opinion. I don't think that's ever going to happen, or at least not for a very, very, very long time.
Well, Scott,
until Ukraine is politically manipulated.
I mean, the city of Kharkov is only 40 kilometers from the Russian border. I mean, they have to do something about that. And the city of Zaporizhia, which is on the Russian-controlled side, that they want to control that side of the Dnieper, they have to do something about that.
Again,
that's like 2 million total people combined between those two cities. Yes, a lot of people have left, but that's going to be a difficult task unless Ukraine militarily and politically is just basically abandons those places and the Russians bribe, the people that are there now, which is possible, or they kill them. Who knows? I mean, but I think there's some major issues still that have to be addressed. Like, what do they do about these things? Like, they can't allow Ukraine to launch major strikes again from large population centers that they control within range of Russian forces. So, I mean, it's like a huge, huge question mark for me as to when Russia can basically say, okay, we'll stop with what we have. I think if they did that today, it would be a major, major embarrassment. I think they really need to take more strategic areas, like some of those larger cities.
And like I said, the way that the Russians talk right now, I do not believe that it's genuine. And I don't believe that the Russians only want these 4 oblasts. I think that they definitely want more. I think that the commitment they've made to this Ukraine conflict now, and the extent to which Europe has pushed this conflict, and to the extent that the U.S. has pushed this conflict in Ukraine, I think that the maximum goal for Russia is needed to be achieved now, instead of previously where they could have taken less. Like what we're seeing right here on this map, they could have taken this with NATO neutrality and been happy, right? But now that they're talking, I mean, France is talking about sending troops in and stuff. This has to be solved for Russia. If Ukraine is not solved permanently right now, I just did a podcast with Grisha, and he was on my roundtable, for those of you who don't know, and he basically was saying that in his fear is that if a bad deal is taken, because he doesn't always trust. He didn't actually say that. That might be my own spin. He thinks that Putin could potentially take a deal that would eventually see his kids fighting another war in Ukraine, and that's what he doesn't want. So, sort of a Russian perspective on it. He thinks that if this isn't settled in some nice wrap up way, that his kids or potentially he will be fighting in Ukraine.
Basically, you can't afford to allow Ukraine to rearm over the course of
10 to 20 years. I mean, there has to be some pretty substantial concessions.
You do know how ridiculous that sounds, right?
What sounds?
You can't allow Ukraine to rearm.
No.
You can't really stop them from rearming, to be fair. I mean,
you can't. I'm sorry, guys, but like what you're saying is not.
You put that in you put that. So what we're talking about right now is a capitulation, right? If Ukraine capitulates and they surrender, and there's going to be concessions with that surrender, and one of those concessions will likely be something along the lines of the Treaty of Versailles, where you cannot rearm, or you
Well,
will be
that's
invaded
not. I'm
again.
sorry, but that's not going to happen.
Well,
That's not
then
gonna
they're going to get invaded again, and they lose even more of their
You know,
country.
like-
But
so-
precisely because of that threat, Scott, they're going
But
to be.
okay, so
Eastern
you either
Ukraine
do,
will
or
become
you either get invaded now.
seriously securitized.
You either
What you're
get
talking
invaded
about.
now because you decide to continue arming yourself. Also, what we're talking about is probably a regime change in Ukraine.
Yes.
We're talking about a completely different government. We're talking about a completely
I
different.
don't think that's realistic either, though, dude. Because
you don't think the government's
no
gonna
Russian
change?
installed government is going to have any legitimacy.
No, I never
what's
said a
within
Russian
Ukraine.
installed government, but there is going to have to be some sort of change of government for the Kiev regime to negotiate. I mean, if you think that the current administration in Ukraine, the current regime, is going to be there at the end of this conflict, I have a bridge to sell you guys.
Okay, so what replaces it? Is it the Poroshenko bloc?
I-
Svoboda?
No, listen, I don't know who replaces it. I don't know who they exactly have lined up.
Take a
I
step
think
back
it has
for
to
a
be
second.
somebody. I think it has to be somebody
Well-
agreeable with Europe. And
Okay,
with
so
Russia.
Scott, I've listened for about a good 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back for a second. Okay, so Russia largely controls what Novorossiya represents, right? Up until Odessa, connected with Transnistria, that's what the Russians largely would like. Maybe up to the Dnieper River, that's what you could potentially see in a peace deal. I think in a more generous sense, right? That they are like, okay, we will, pull out, or we will allow you west of Dnieper, because that has historically been how Ukraine was separated, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth on the west and the Russian Empire on the east of the river. I personally cannot see how, if the Russians are to continue making progress, which they seem to be slowly, that this will suddenly be like, okay, we're going to give you loads of that stuff, and then the Ukrainians just like capitulate completely and demilitarize. Okay, you can demilitarize Ukraine and force them to be neutral. Problem with that is that they will then feel that they're going to be invaded again. So what happens? Either they militarize themselves, or they get NATO to do it for them. So the Russians are wary of that. And so you're going to reach this impasse where Ukraine is like, we don't want to demilitarize because we don't trust the Russians. The Russians are like, well, we want you to demilitarize because otherwise we're going to stay where we are and invade you again. And you sort of don't go anywhere. Regime change is a subset of that, because get rid of Zelensky, sure, you can have elections where the Russians feel that the person who's in power is more befitting to them, but the West will be like, well, we don't want that person.
It's not even about befitting, though. It's about being a legitimate negotiating partner. That's all it is about. It's not.
Yeah, but that's
not about being pro-Russian.
Contention for both sides.
It doesn't. I'm not in my prediction, envisionment, whatever. It's not necessarily a puppet Russian government in Ukraine. That's not what I'm saying. It's a different government that has a different stance towards negotiations with Russia. That's the only difference.
But that's the thing. The parties that haven't been banned, they're all more or less on the same page.
Okay, but you know what happens when a collapse happens, right? This is what we're talking about. We're not talking about the status quo right now. We're talking about if a mobilization happens. This could be in the year 2026. That is what I'm talking about, right? Or 2027. We're talking about years of fighting. Ukraine will not have an economy. Ukraine will not have a population, basically, at that point. What are they going to do? You're talking about rearming. Who are you rearming? Well, like you've sent all of your men away. Anybody else is working. Like there's nobody to rearm. Why would Ukraine need to be rearmed by the West when this is settled and Russia has gotten what it needs out of Ukraine? I mean, if you think they're going to push into Western Ukraine, they've never one time said that they have any ambition in doing that. It's not their historical lands. They don't like the people there. They don't like the culture. They don't want to deal with the problems. There's no economic benefit for them. So there's like a difference here between the propaganda of what Russia might do if Ukraine surrenders and gives up Odessa or whatever east of the Dnieper or whatever, but everything changes the second the Ukrainian regime collapses, the second the Ukrainian military collapses. As soon as there's no more organized resistance, which is what it looks like we're heading to, right? I don't see any slowdown in pace by either military right now, but one military is going to run out of manpower soon. One military is going to run out of equipment because they're not being fed like they
But you're
should by
not
the
going to
West.
see the Russians going towards Western Ukraine. You're not. The
No.
Russians are not
Oh
going
no,
to do.
no!
No,
I don't think I can even make it.
No,
towards-
Western Ukraine is
towards
off the
Kiev.
table. That's never
Listen,
going to happen.
listen,
They're
and
not gonna go.
Odessa is a huge if in my thing too. I'm not going
No,
west.
Odessa could be possible. Odessa's
Yeah, no,
probably
well, but
possible.
possible. But Kharkov is an absolute must. It's 40 kilometers from the border.
I would say
you have to take
I would
that
say
city.
I would say Kharkov, Sumy, and Chernigov are all musts.
Yeah, that's
And
Eastern Unified.
Zaporizhia is
That's
also a place where Ukraine has staged many strikes with drones and missiles and things like that. So you have to take that out too.
and also, there's a couple of other points. If you remember that the Russians had 6 criteria, 6 demands in their original peace deal from March 22, and that was largely consisting of what? No NATO, no EU, neutral Ukraine, Russian language, forever, enshrined in the constitution, and a couple of other things, right? Crimea and something else, right? I think you could see Russia incorporated into the constitution. NATO, definitely not. But I do think Putin has always had a slightly more sort of open-mindedness about the European Union, but that was before February 22nd, or February 22, and also because after Macron's comments today and Macron's general desire to sort of want to securitize Europe with a European army of some sort, I think that could change as well. So
yeah, I don't think the EU's a no big deal anymore because they have a mutual defense agreement there too.
Yeah.
That just becomes horrendously complicated.
Yeah, Borg, when I'm saying Putin open-minded, it's relative to other stuff, right? So the general idea of what I'm talking about was in the past 8-10 years of the original war since 2014, the idea was that Ukraine could have connection to Europe in some ways, but not in others, i.e. it never joined NATO, but maybe eventually join the EU. The Russians sort of said that they were sort of on board with that, but it changed. So personally for me, I don't see this situation becoming well resolved, because whilst I agree with Scott to a point, I don't think you're suddenly just going to see the entire Ukrainian military sort of just disband or it's not Afghanistan. It's not. They're still quite well kitted out, and whether or not you've got troops to fight them, I mean, at that point, the West probably would be like, well, we're not going to have Russia right on our borders in Ukraine as well. The Polish would definitely do something. I guarantee you, the Polish wouldn't just be like, yeah, that's fine. We've got the Russians right on our immediate border. They would go in. They would go into Lviv. They would do what the Turkish have done in Syria and create a buffer zone of what, like 2-3 kilometers. But we're talking about extreme scenario here, like the Russians just steam. Ukraine's a massive fucking country.
Yeah, I don't see this ending with a pretty bow on top of it either. Probably more like the frozen conflicts in the Caucasus.
Well, DMZ, frozen conflict, that sort of shit. I can imagine you having a DMZ zone or something, or a UN buffer zone, right?
That I think is most likely.
I don't disagree with you in the likeliness. It's just, Sam, please stop. Just in my personal opinion, I think that after Minsk and after obviously the Minsk Accords and everything, and after Istanbul, there's no way you could. I mean, like, again, a DMZ would basically mean. Sorry, my dogs are getting restless. A DMZ would basically mean that Ukraine would have room to rearm and do all the things that you're talking about. And then again, you're just perpetuating this war 10 years down the road.
Pretty much.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the most likely scenario. You're not going to get Ukraine to concede its territories. So that's going to be a problem.
Right. They're not.
You're not going to get them to agree to never rearm. You're not a state anymore at that point if you don't
personally
have
I think that Ukraine would be as best positioned as Austria was, the Austrian model of the 1940s 50s, where they were essentially a neutral state between West and East. That's what Ukraine could and should have been, but due to different reasons it hasn't. But could we still see that happen? Possibly, but it's pretty clear that Ukraine would lose eastern parts of its territory. I don't think you're going to see the western part of Ukraine absorbed by Poland, as some people have suggested, but I do think Ukraine would become a smaller state, maybe not a full rump state, but it's lost to all its coastline. But you're going to see some degree of territory lost. I mean, they're not going to take back this territory that Russia has controlled. It's just not. It's not realistic. And anyone who says that it is just not. As I said, I'm going to be realistic to the wall. Let's be honest, right? I don't think this is right, but Russia controls this territory, and they're not going. It's the most mind-fucking part of the world since the Second World War. There's no way that the Ukrainians can just sort of go through that and think that it's all hunky-dory. You know what I mean? And even if they do take back that territory, what the fuck are they going to do with that land? It's not arable anymore. It's not agriculturally enrichable. You can't do anything with it. So I just think that the Ukrainian situation is pretty fucked, and it's about damage limitation at this point. Is it a marginal victory for them or an outright victory for the Russians?
But here's the thing. I fully agree with you, Pyotr. But are you seeing them take a single step in that direction at all? Because this is the issue I have. We can talk about a demilitarized zone, all this, that, and the other. But as far as I can tell, the Ukrainians have no desire at all. What they're trying to do right now is escalate the conflict by going into the Belgorod region and doing all this stuff, right? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any sort of rational thinking, any planning. You've seen what's going on up at the border. It's a complete waste of resources. It's a ridiculous thing trying to gain political points against the election. I just don't see how.
No, but Scott, that's not. I get what you're saying, but that's not the point.
I know it's not. But
the Ukrainians are not going to see it like that. They're going to fight because it's like the Palestinians, right? They're going to keep fighting because they're not going to capitulate. They're not going to give in, even though the odds are completely ridiculous. But if you actually talk to people on the ground, I was there only 3 months ago, and at that point the sentiment amongst Ukrainians in the West was so different to those in Kiev, because those in Kiev are close to the front lines and they understand for the first time that they might not actually not win, but not just win all their territory back, right? There was this false, and this is where I think you get a lot of hate and unfairly, you've never not acknowledged the realism of the war, right? You don't agree necessarily with what's happening, but neither do you think, well, the Ukraine can win outright. And I don't think anyone who's reasonable agrees with that, right? And now, for the first time, Ukrainians who have been sold an unfair amount of perspectives like, yes, we will win everything and Russia will be destroyed. Who the fuck thought that was realistic, right? That's not going to happen. And the Ukrainians are beginning to feel that. A bunch of people in my chat did. Well, some people. But the Ukrainians, for the first time in the 2 years of this war, are beginning to actually acknowledge the fact that they might not win this thing. And that is a big change, and that is a stark reality that a lot of them can't accept. And I think that that's going to have more of an impact on the battlefield than any amount of artillery fire supplies can.
What happens when that reality is you cannot ignore it? What happens when this is another thing when I talk about the collapse of the regime and stuff. What happens when people stop allowing their sons to be picked up in vans and taken away? Like that it has to come to a head at some point, right? The world is too globalized. I mean, they have a lot of censorship in Ukraine, but it's not 1945 Nazi Germany, right? You're not being fed just pure propaganda through only a newspaper. I mean, you get news from other places. You have the opportunity, word of mouth. I mean, there has to be, I feel like a lot of the issues with a lot of the analysis that even I do is you kind of assume like the status quo is going to continue, but it's just not possible. The status quo will not continue. And when that massive amount of change starts happening, I think that the overall dynamics of this conflict are going to become extremely fluid, and you could see a lot of different things in a lot of different directions. And the reason why I say that Russia might end up with so much of Ukraine is because I don't believe that like France or any NATO member country is ever actually going to put men on the ground in Ukraine. And outside of that, what can they possibly do? Are they going to sanction Russia? You can't do that, right? So as far as Russia's concerned, they have full control of the escalation ladder. They have no fear of sanctions from the West. They can go as far as they want in Ukraine. And yes, the Ukrainians will not capitulate their land that easily. But once the whole illusion is broken, the same way it was in Berlin, everybody in Berlin knew that the war was over. when the Russians were entering Germany, when the United States entered Germany on both sides, they knew the war was over, and they stopped fighting. They started turning over their weapons. They started doing all sorts of different stuff. I mean, some units kept fighting till the end, but there was no Steiner counterattack, right? That never happened.
So I got a quick question for you, just for fun,
Eventually,
for anyone in the chat.
Yeah.
I want you to guess how many sanctions the Russians now have up against them.
It's 10,000 plus, right?
Well, okay, for context, prior to February 24th, they had less than Iran, and Iran had about 3,200.
I think they had 1,800 before.
Now they have whatever, it was like less than it was. Now it's 19,267. 19,000 sanctions. Like they're are just the most sanctioned country in history. They seriously, they've more sanctions than I read one statistic was saying it was worse than just having an embargo like Cuba.
I mean, Piotr, they sanctioned Russian cats, for fuck's sake.
Bro,
it's insane. It's insane.
You can't even buy a polar bear in Russia anymore. Everything got sanctioned. It's crazy, man. 19,000 sanctions, and they're talking about adding additional sanction packages. That's just
basically, yeah. And these are sanctions that consist of financial, targeted to specific assets. And you know what? I'm in London right now, and I was out to dinner after a show. Do you know who's around me in the centre of London? Anywhere I go,
Russians.
Fucking Russian.
Yeah.
The common, the colloquial term for London these days is Londongrad, not London, just Londongrad.
Is that because of all of the Russians that left?
It's insane. And all this shit about you can't fly everyone. Everyone just flies to fucking Turkey or UAE. It's
exactly.
It's
not necessarily Russians that have left. It's just like Russians that traveled to London. They have the connections there. Maybe they flew under the radar, but many of those sanctions on the list are people too. Like individuals have been sanctioned. Like Sergei Lavrov had to put all of his property in other people's names, or it's taken. So
this is actually a really good question. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Zag. Are you done?
No, it's fine. But I'm just saying that if they start seizing frozen assets or sending Ukraine the interest that's been accrued on those frozen assets, I mean, the Russians have basically said we're going to do something to retaliate, basically seize something comparable of yours. It's just not going to end well if you play those games. It's just not.
Yeah. I fully agree. Yeah, the whole seizing Russia's foreign assets thing has been, they've talked about it so much and they just can't find a legal way to do it.
Of course, because because if it's legal to do it, it undermines their entire financial system. Because who's next?
Yeah,
who's next? Where there's a disagreement on foreign policy, and out of nowhere, everything's not only seized but stolen.
I've been hoping that they go with it.
20 years ago, no one would care. Yeah. But now there's an alternative. Granted, it's not as big as the Chinese system is nowhere as big, but the Chinese haven't stolen anything yet. All they have to do is not steal. It's a gift horse. It's a gift on a silver platter to your actual peer competitor.
Mm-hmm. Which is why they're not doing it. And it's smart to not do it. If Russia captures territory all the way to Transnistria, during peace talks, would Russia allow Ukraine to have a small port near Romania? I believe absolutely. I bet they'll let them have access to a port in Odessa. Once again, once the war is over, in my personal opinion, regime change follows in Ukraine, and that doesn't mean to a pro-Russian regime. That just means to a regime that is not this disgustingly Russophobic, neo-Nazi, whatever, something that the Russians can kind of at least agree with on terms. They don't have to be friends afterwards. They don't have to talk, but they can agree on something. Remember, money is
business is business.
Yeah, money's the big player here. It's never going to change. So you already control the Black Sea. Why not allow Ukraine to use your port infrastructure, right? It just makes sense.
I mean, the Danube even allows them to have ports along it that run out through Odessa. It wouldn't be a huge deal if they're not at war, right?
Yeah. Yep. And so, yes, if Russia was to get Odessa, I fully believe that Ukraine would still have access to the Black Sea. It just would not have access to the Black Sea without probably paying some form of tax.
They'd be able to transit via the Black Sea. They wouldn't have a presence on it. It's kind of like it'd be exactly like how Armenia exports through Georgian ports.
Yeah, same deal. But that's a big if Russia gets Odessa. Another Russian offensive from Belarus, not likely. Unless something dramatic changes in Ukraine, not likely. The Russians, the reason why they went in from Belarus in the beginning was one of two reasons, obviously. If there was a complete collapse of the Ukrainian state, they're right there. They can go in, walk in.
Yeah, that's absurd. Belarus is out of the picture.
Yeah.
The Russians are using it for what they want, backyard and nuclear stockpiling. Not going to be. It's got no tactical usage right now. As for Odessa and some port in Romania, I mean, first you've got to look at there's an interesting thing happening in Moldova and Romania at the moment, which is that because of war in Ukraine now, the Romanians and the Moldovians particularly are getting quite keen on the idea of unifying again with Romania, which is not, practically speaking, very likely because Romania is a lot wealthier. It's an EU member, like Schengen area member, and it is part of NATO.
But how
NATO would be the roadblock because of Transnistria. The Gagosians
I'm not
want
even
out
counting
if that's going to happen.
But yeah, I'm not even counting that. But yeah, so my point is, you've got to take that into consideration before you start talking about some port that the Russians would allow the Ukrainians sort of buy or rent in land. For how the fuck would that work? I just don't see that scenario happening, to be honest. Sure, money talks, but you'd have to get.
You don't think they would after the war's over, after they've achieved their goals?
Okay, fine. That's a long-term investment, then I suppose.
Yeah, I'm talking 10, 15 years after.
Oh, right. Okay.
When the Ukrainian economy has somewhat stabilized and they're back to their agricultural production, whatever they can do and with what's left of their country, then using the port, I said, was a potential. And you don't think any of Western Ukraine will go to Poland, Piotr?
Wait, what?
Are
you talking about your other chat the other day where you made the map?
No, I'm just curious as to if you think any of that goes to Poland.
Yeah, I was just hoping you could send me whatever you were smoking that day, because I think that's wackadoo. That's wackadoo, mate. No, fucking hell.
Do you mean the Medvedev map?
Yes, that's fucking ridiculous, mate.
Yeah, no, the Medvedev map is like crack smoking delusion.
Come on. What the fuck?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that this is realistic, but all I was saying was that this portion right here seems that I could believe is realistic. I don't know about these two regions. I have no idea.
Look, the bit that's realistic is that the Russians will take either there's three scenarios that I think is realistic or reasonable from the Russian perspective. They take what they have already. They take up to Odessa, connect it to Transnistria. That becomes Novorossiya. Or they take the whole of eastern Ukraine up until the Dnieper, but that's a substantial amount of land, and the Ukrainians would have to be really something has to happen there, because the Ukrainians aren't just going to give up all the extra land unless the Russians literally just push it through.
I don't think any of this.
This is why I say it all hinges on if whether the mobilization bill goes through and in what form and what happens if it does, because there's provisions in there that'll cause some massive backlash amongst the populace. If they don't get the mobilization, then eventually, they run out of manpower and line starts collapsing.
Yeah,
and
you guys know. You guys know Mearsheimer, I'm going to presume. So John Mearsheimer, very famous academic from the US. For listeners, he wrote an article in 2014, which I have always loved, which was when the West got it wrong, or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, but the Ukraine is the West's fault. This caused absolute ramifications, but I've never more aligned with anything written, because he had the audacity to admit that the West were complicit in what happened with Crimea. Right? I've never disregarded that article, and his takes on the war have been lambasted by the mainstream stuff for being he's anti-West and all this sort of shit. No, he just is very fucking good at reading this situation.
That's the thing. He's not anti-West. He's all in America because he's an American, but he's not wrong about that. He's a realist, literally. I mean, we had an expression in uni about him where all international relations problems can be categorized into one of two ways: things that John Mearsheimer is right about, and things that he hasn't yet been proven to be right about.
Yeah, precisely. So yeah, I'm trying to get in touch with him because I'd like to get him on. So
I would
maybe
like to have him on too.
yeah, he's anyway. But yeah,
He's more your speed though.
Well, he's very nerdy. He was the founder of offensive and defensive realism, which is a concept in international relations. If you know. But
he's awesome. Everybody in chat, go check out Mearsheimer if you have not. He's on Judging Freedom very regularly. That's one of the few that I watch consistently is Mearsheimer when he's on.
Andrew Napolitano.
I spoke to him about 5 years ago. He did a book signing in DC, and I asked him my favorite question, which was, how do you think the West and Russia can get closer together? And that was me being my ignorant, naive 20-something self. And his only response was the rise of China. And I just went, am I listening to my dad? Because that's basically what my father says, which is that the only way the way the Russians and the West get closer is because China becomes a common enemy for them both. But because of the way that the West has acted, specifically the Americans and Brits, the Russians are like, Putin's getting into bed with the Chinese. Do you really think the Russians have more in common with the Chinese than the Europeans?
Nope, especially not Putin.
No,
ridiculous.
No, but when you push too far, states will bandwagon.
It's true.
No, I agree. I'm just saying it's the most basic concept. When Peter the Great, who's one of the most famous Russian Tsars or kings, went to Western Europe in the 1710s, put it this way, what the fuck do you think St. Petersburg is based on? Amsterdam, Copenhagen. Yeah. It's not based on Shanghai. Yeah. Like the culture and architecture. Russia is largely a European nation, but because the West has it in for the Russians,
also the British underestimate the Chinese sort of out of like a position of I don't know, almost regret or shame because they weren't able to stay the course in Hong Kong and whatever. So I think they've long underestimated, and maybe even a little bit of xenophobia there in that sense that, the Chinese, the Russians present far more of a threat to us. The Chinese are never going to be able to compete with sort of the Western paradigm. They're of no consequence and whatever. So I think we're very much underestimating China and China's sort of need and desire to compete on a world stage and prove that they're not a paper tiger and that they can jockey with the best of them. And that's going to be something that we have to reconcile with because we have serious defensive obligations in Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So, I mean, again, that's another U.S. vulnerability.
Just to answer this question real fast, I do not believe they got this hypersonic missile from the Russians. I believe that if they got it, a huge if they got it from the Iranians. It's the Fed.
Like I said earlier when this came up, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that they have that.
Do you know how much those things are? The Russians are not going to give them to a wannabe.
They're not giving them away.
No, but I mean, if they have them, it's from Iran. But I'll believe it when I see it because I do not believe that the Houthis have hypersonic missiles.
I also don't believe that Iran is wanting to escalate right now in that direction with the Houthis. Why? You are obviously. There's obviously backdoor talks going on, trying to prevent a conflict in the region, and then the Iranians are just going to escalate by giving the Houthis something that could strike both Israel and ships in the Red Sea. No, I don't see that being.
1 second, let me change my picture to a laughing emoji because that's so funny. No, that's just not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very new, very expensive missile system. You don't want it falling into the wrong hands. And
then there's what you do with the delivery systems because you have to. Those aren't going to last more than 15 minutes before they're eradicated.
Wait, isn't a Kinjal also only aircraft deliverable right now?
Yes, but I mean, it's. Again, if they have one, it's not from Russia, it's from Iran. I don't think don't think Iran would give them one, but Iran technically, I think theirs the one their prototype is ground launched, but I am not certain.
That would make sense.
It's a prototype.
Yeah, from my understanding, the Iranians are trying to work on this because they want delivery systems for the nuclear warheads that they're near or have already probably, developed. So, anyway, chaps, ladies, it's been a pleasure. I'm heading out, so I'll catch you.
Thank you for joining, Piotr.
Yeah,
Oh,
thanks a lot for
pleasure,
letting me
Piotr.
join. I'll definitely try and join you more
Take
often
care,
if that's of
Piotr.
interest. And yeah, take it easy, all right? Good night.
Take it easy, man. Well, that was fun. It's been 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching. Especially thank you to the NAFO, who I've seen in here for 2 hours and 10 minutes watching somebody that they absolutely detest. You know, I say they absolutely detest me, but they're all talking about me, and they all love me, and they all listen to me talk for 2 hours. So we're going strong, boys. Thank you for the engagement. I am engagement farming NAFO. I appreciate it. You make my page bigger. I appreciate all of you who are not trash human beings in here as well. You are all fantastic. For all 40-year-old NAFO boomers, go spend some time with your kids, right? 50s, 60s. I know you're lonely, but I'm sure that there's a club or a knitting something or something you guys can do, because this pathetic garbage you talking about my genitalia and stuff is so weird and inappropriate and just like horrible. No, why would I block you on Twitter? Oh, why did I block you on Twitter? Probably because you posted some stupid meme that I just didn't want to see. You know how annoying it is seeing the same fucking memes from you guys 30 times a day because you're all unoriginal and unfunny? It's horrible. All right, there's my NAFO rant. Thank you guys. Take care. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody who donated. It is awesome. You are making my life much more enjoyable through this line of work. I really appreciate everybody. Take care. If somebody posted a question about bodybuilding, I'll do it. I'll answer it tomorrow on my solo stream. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.